Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we're talking about Titane.
Titane.
French for titanium.
That is French.
Written and directed by Julia Ducournau,
Yes.
who's this shining light of modern horror, particularly a kind of emerging feminist horror over the last few years. She made Raw in 2016, which I've not seen. You have.
Yes.
Which was about a cannibal. And we just watched a video essay on it by one of your students.
That's right, which is great, I think.
What's the name of your student?
Polina Zalmanova.
Okay.
And I thought it was very illuminating. And actually, I think it was very illuminating for Titane as well.
Yeah. Well, so like I said, I haven't seen Raw. I must say, after having seen Titane, I'm not that interested in seeing Raw. I'm not sure. Yeah. Well, I was so interested in Titane early on, and then I felt a kind of longer as the film went on.
Oh God, no! I found it endlessly horrifying. I mean, this is not the type of film I like. I think I had my hands on my eyes and.
Oh, you were jumping all over the
seat.
shop.
I hate this type of film, I must say. That said, it is fascinating.
Yes, I think it is interesting. The thrills kind of died down for me, but I think that's part of the point, right? The film starts off with a lot of shock and a lot of violence and a lot of sexual thrills as well, and then turns into something else. It kind of sets those up so it can undercut what it sets up early on, I think.
Yes.
So the film begins with a young girl annoying her dad in the back of a car, and it causes a car crash at high speed, and the kid ends up with a plate in her head. Cut to probably 15, 20 years later, when she's a young adult, played by Agathe Roussel, and she's working at a motor show. We see she's a dancer, but she's one of the ladies there who is there to be in a state of undress, and she's dancing sexually on this car. She's found attractive by both sides of the gender divide. She's got fans, yeah, they're seeking autographs, and we see her kill one of them immediately. And it kind of sets up, to me, it implies that what we're going to find is, men are toxic, women have to fight them off. That's sort of what it's setting up early on. And the violence with which she fights them off feels justified. Or, well, maybe justified is going too far. In a horror context, it feels justified, because that's what horror does. It's then revealed that she's actually a serial killer. She's killed other people in the preceding few weeks or months. And after killing some more, she ends up on the run from the police. And in attempting to hide from them, takes on the disguise, basically turns herself into this young boy who's been missing. There are these posters all around, these young people that have been missing. They went missing when they were kids, and they've been aged up to what they might look like now at the age of 17, 18. She says, oh, maybe I could turn myself into one of those. Convinced the police and the dad that I am this son, and get away from the police. And so the film turns into an interesting sort of familial drama, where the focus very heavily becomes on the dad, who believes he has his son back, and the girl's attempts to not be discovered. It gets interesting. The horror sort of drops, right? Dies down.
I think it's interesting from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that what you're seeing in the very first shot is this father very annoyed at this child who's actually being really obnoxious, and the father can't pay attention to the road, and then the father goes to slap this child down. Yeah, it kind of is the result of a slap, and of course the car overturns, and the child, needs to have a titanium plate put on their brain, right? And so there's something interesting from the beginning, because that behavior in a boy might not have resulted in the father turning around. Yeah, it's behavior that's obnoxious. It's particularly obnoxious in a girl. Though, at that moment, I actually wasn't clear whether she was a girl or not.
Well, as we were just discussing before, I wasn't clear on the gender of the dad, because I thought it was the kid's mum driving the car.
No, I think to me, it's quite clear that it's the father.
Well, I
think it's important that it's the father.
Well, I don't agree with you that it's particularly obnoxious behaviour in a girl, and I don't even agree necessarily that it's especially obnoxious behaviour in a child. It is what kids do, and it does piss off the parents when they're trying to drive a car. But it doesn't strike me as kind of unusually obnoxious in either a boy or a girl.
Well, I thought it was in both, but particularly a girl, because the child is defiant. Yeah. So, the father is telling her to stop. Yeah, and many times, and you could see how irritated they are, and the child keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. And, my view is that would be very, annoying in a boy, and it would be, particularly annoying to a father in a girl.
Mm.
But that's maybe just the way that we read gender, I think, because there is a confrontation there that you might expect, or you might more readily accept of a boy than of a girl.
Okay. I'm not interested in continuing the argument. I don't think it's a major point.
I think it's a major point because, the whole of the ending of the film is a kind of reconciliation with the father.
Yeah, but I don't think that it's interesting enough whether this is particularly obnoxious behaviour in a girl. Relationship with the father is one thing.
I mean, again, I think gender is absolutely crucial to this film.
Of course it is.
So this thing about what boys are expected to do, what girls are expected to do, what socially acceptable behaviour is and how the various ways in which it's transgressed, that is part of what the film is about. That's actually that is what,
Yes, it is, but I'm not sure it's crucial to this particular moment.
Well, I think it is, and and the film begins that way, and I think it's important that the film begins that way because then it sets up patternings that unfold in the rest of the film.
Can you describe those patternings?
Well, so for example, this thing about you're initially not being sure whether it's a boy or it's a girl, then kind of she goes from being a girl to passing as a boy. The behavior that is acceptable in girls, but not acceptable in boys, or not acceptable in boys, but it's acceptable in girls, whichever way you want it. She often kills people by being girly. Yeah, she embraces them and then brings out the knife. Mm. So, even a lot of her murders are a play on gender expectations.
Mm. Something that was raised in your student video essay that we watched was the idea that in Raw, a monstrous character, a cannibal, who would ordinarily, in a horror film, be someone from a savage tribe or some result of a medical experiment that turned them into a cannibal, is made human. Very human and relatable. You understand this person. And she shows a clip of this girl being subject to a home invasion at the start, so we relate to her, right? That's the idea. And I thought, it's so the opposite of the relationship with the girl here, I think. Alexia, the character's name is. In that I think it's a project of the film that you are not meant to be able to identify with her, really, sympathise with her. Actually, I think she's meant to be, monstrous, I suppose, in the way that the girl in Raw, as your student suggests, is not. And actually, one of the things that's overturned, as I said earlier, I think the film is setting up initially, this idea of toxic masculinity, is completely overturned. Not completely, but made more complex. The father in particular, he's masculine, he's injecting steroids, he runs this fire department, but he deeply misses his son. He's openly emotional about getting him back, so he thinks, I'll die to protect you, and so on. Desperate to connect with him.
He's much more fragile than she is, even in a very vulnerable state.
Exactly. So it opens this complexity in that male character in particular. And I think it denies the female character that kind of complexity.
I don't think it denies it. I think it brings a different kind of complexity to the woman.
Okay.
I mean, I thought Paulina's whole discussion of the monstrous feminine, of how, being feminine is in a way, kind of being in itself monstrous. But then how the film underlines it because, she gets pregnant, and there's petrol coming out of her, breasts, right? So, the mother's milk that she's building up is petrol.
Oil,
Yeah, it's when her water bursts, what bursts forth is oil, so it's this black, sleek, So a woman's body is underlined to be kind of monstrous by the film, and also because in this case it's also part machine. I mean, I don't know if you mentioned that she has sex with a car.
I didn't mention that. So early on, after you've seen her dancing at this motor show, she feels some kind of call to her, and she goes out to this car that she's been dancing on, which is like, it's a sexy car. It's some old Cadillac, I think it's covered in flames, you know, decals. And she gets in the back, and you don't see initially the car's bouncing like, you know, hydraulics. Well, that's what it looks like.
It's a very funny scene. I thought this was funny.
Yeah, I think it is designed to elicit a certain degree of humour. And then you see a couple of shots in the back of the car where her arms are bound up in the seat belts, and, you know, her legs are spread, and she's engaging in sex with the car.
Yes.
And then during the course of the rest of the film, she develops an unusual pregnancy because of it.
That's right. I mean, that was the film makes conceptual sense, but narratively, or, you know, as a story, it doesn't quite. Right? Like, I mean, I think, why is she having sex with a car? Is there something about her titanium plate, you know, that has changed her?
Well, there is a shot right at the start before we go to her being an adult, where she comes out of the hospital having been installed with this plate, and she hugs the car.
Yes.
You know, she puts her head right up against it, and she kisses the car, in fact.
Yes.
So that's a connection that I'm not sure that we've seen that connection before. I think that's the implication is that this plate in her head has enabled this, or brought it out, or created this connection that she feels.
I know, but how a car has sentience, you know, and sexual desire.
Well, it's magic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean...
Anyway, that's what I'm saying. The film works on a conceptual level that actually doesn't make sense. I mean, you know, even a fantasy film or whatever would have given you some explanation of how this...
I'm not sure it would. I think it is purely in the realms of magic and...
Well, but there's no other sense of any other type of magic in the film.
No, but I don't know why there has to be in order for you to just go with, oh, she got pregnant by a car, let's see what happens.
Yeah, well, I don't think our audiences would buy if she got pregnant by a car, let's see what happens. I think, you know, you would have to give some reason for it, or, you know, do some world building that would explain how a car can have sentience and sexual desire. And in fact, no other cars in the film subsequently do. Right, it's just presented as a fait accompli that this one does.
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure why you can't give it go with the flight of fancy about it.
Well, I did.
Okay.
When watching the film, but this is where I'm saying that the film to me works conceptually and not narratively.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I do think that in order to kind of create a world in which cars have sentience and desire, I would need something more. It would have to be a different world. Whereas actually, this is seen to be exactly like our world, except, you know, cars respond to her. They don't respond to anybody else.
No.
So
I'm not sure it's a good objection to the film, really.
Well, it's mine.
No, I appreciate that.
You know, and I see, and I suspect I like the film more than you. I mean, I think it's really fascinating, kind of, in all the things it does. I mean, particularly, you know, about gender and body horror and, you know, the monstrous feminine, that the film kind of is almost would fit into, you know, a whole pantheon of, you know, feminist literature on horror, from Linda Williams to Barbara Creed, you know, to everyone really. And the imagery is absolutely fascinating. And there are scenes that I think are very, very powerful, and again have to do with gender. The scene with the firemen all dancing, like they're all hopped up onto testosterone, right, kind of jumping around, dancing to techno, and then, you know, they still think he's a man, she's a man, Adrian, and they put her up on top of the fire truck, and then she dances, not only in a very feminine way, but in a very striptease.
Yeah, absolutely. She's back in it's a reflection of that scene right at the start where she's dancing on the car.
Exactly.
It's not as sexual because she's not like lying down, but it's the same scene basically.
It's pretty sexual. I mean, she puts a diamond on her vagina to have, you know, to frame it. You know, I think
it's the same scene.
Yeah, the film is fascinating on those levels.
Do you think it's a feminist film?
Completely. Totally.
I think it has a feminist project. This is what I was getting at by saying this is the construction of the character of someone who I feel is meant to be someone basically impossible to relate to. Because I think the part of the project is to go, men are monsters in films all the time in horror, and we don't have to relate to Jason Voorhees or whoever the fuck it is. But for some reason women aren't allowed to not be relatable in some way. And this film goes, no, we're going to have a woman who is a monster just like the men are who you don't feel the need to relate to. I think that's part of the project.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I have to think about that a bit more. I mean, she's definitely not... Well, I couldn't relate to her, let's put it this way. However, her feelings are always highlighted. She is psychologized. Yeah, and she does go through a psychological development in the film. She learns to love, right? Which you get the sense that she hadn't before. I mean, she set her parents on fire, right? So... And even, I mean, I think the whole scene with the other stripper who's got the, how do you call it?
Nipple piercings.
The nipple piercings. You know, she's presented as being really nice, they fall in love, and then she becomes brutal, right? So you see her as someone kind of who has no sense of others. Yeah, to someone who actually, by the end of the film, has learned to love. Yeah.
Yeah, she's learned to find some connection with this dad.
Yes.
And let him in.
That's right. So I think, well, I suppose, you know, it's a little bit like Frankenstein as well. I mean, you get that in Frankenstein, don't you? But you're not complete. So she's not someone you identify with, but she is someone who's given a psychology and a development and a kind of a catharsis, I suppose. You know, she learns to love and then dies. Spoiler. And that's interesting because the film begins with her, but then it really ends with the father figure who's not her real father, who's lost the child and now has another chance with a new child. Yeah, because that's how the film ends.
Yeah,
with this man embracing this cyborgian child who's actually like a real baby, but has a saw ridge
titanium spine.
Yeah.
Yes, a new life has been created. A new type of life has been created.
Yes.
I also think it's possible to see quite an unfeminist message in it, though, in that this is a mute, psychopathic woman, you know, who is killing for completely unjustified reasons.
I don't think they're unjustified.
Well, so many murders at the start really have no purpose. And I think that's part of the point of the film.
The first one is the sexually aggressive guy, and the whole scene is presented with a great deal of danger.
Yeah, now tell me about the others. Why did she kill her parents? Why did she kill the girl? Why did she kill those 4 people in the house?
Well,
they're not justified murders, and again, I think this is part of the thing of constructing her as this amoral monster.
I think the father is justified. You know, you get the sense that the father really... There's something creepy about him watching and looking, and he's the cause of her disfigurement. The only one that, you know, I'm less certain of is the one with the other dancer who picks her up and brings her to the house. Right? Now, I forget what sparked that murder. Yeah. But something did. And then, of course, she has to kill the other people in the house, you know, as a matter of course.
I mean, I think what sparked that murder, the one on the couch, is she sees the ear. I mean, I think it is that. I think that is the point. There is no real spark to it. She's seen the ear, and the reason that I mention the ear is because we've already seen her stab the guy in the ear at the start. With her, you know, her main weapon is this sort of metal stake, I suppose, that she has. Yes. And it's when you see the ear...
Like a metal chopstick or something.
Yeah. And you see her ear as this girl's lying on her lap, and it's a clear reminder of the previous murder that you've seen. And she just goes for it. I mean, completely out of nowhere. You jumped, as you did with pretty much everything.
Yes,
but as did I. You know, I wasn't expecting that one at all. And it really is sparked from nothing. And I think this is the point. And this is why, ultimately, this can be seen as unfeminist, in a way. Because it is constructing this monstrous woman, and ultimately there's a kind of moment of triumph in her death at the end. She dies and a new life is brought into the world, and for the guy who deserves it.
Yes, I suppose I can lend itself to that reading. That wouldn't be my reading. And I think there is something unusual and interesting about having an amoral heroine.
I think it could also be seen, and I'm not saying I do see it like this because I've not really worked through this, but it's worth considering the idea that it could be seen as anti-trans or untrans friendly, in that it uses a number of tropes of. So if you remember, like Boys Don't Cry, there's that whole thing about wrapping the body up, which is exactly what she does here.
She binds her breasts,
and she
binds her pregnancy.
Yeah, she binds her pregnancy. I mean, actually, that's something that I didn't buy for a while because she binds it so tightly, and it's such a large pregnancy that you think, how is she hiding this? But again, I think it's something that I eventually went with. I didn't go with it as quickly as I did the pregnancy happening, but what that binding does is it tears into her body. You know, her breasts are scarred and constantly wounded. There's this idea that, you know, she at no point is she trans. That's not what the film is doing. She is a woman the whole way through, and she identifies as a woman. There's no idea that she is actually changing her gender. She is passing, and this is one of the things that anti-trans people, particularly anti-male to female, this is something that they always say, you know, the whole bathroom bill thing in America, men are just trying to get into women's bathrooms to predate on them, that sort of thing. Now, this is not what's going on here, but the idea of passing it's like cross-dressing, right? The idea that it's just a costume.
But it's not, because, you know, it's accompanied by all of these physical... I mean, I thought it worked very interestingly, metaphorically, you know, as a trans depiction, because there's someone very ill at ease with their body, cutting themselves into it, causing themselves terrible pain, to be, you know, to have it another way. I mean, it would be very interesting to have like a trans person speak on the film, but I think, you know, certainly kind of it evoked a lot of what I understand, you know, to be stages, you know, kind of very powerfully, I thought.
Well, like I say, it's a tricky one, because ultimately the film is not showing a trans person.
No.
You know, that's not who she is, right?
No.
So you can't read it too much in that direction.
So there's something just about her face and her hair, and her stride, that doesn't sit easily with traditional notions of femininity, even at the very beginning of the film.
How so?
Well, I mean, she had on, you know, that haircut, how do you call it, where it's long at the back and short at the front, right? She's very clear about showing off her scar.
Yes, the large scar on the side of her head. It's kind of punk dress, right? That's what I associated it with.
Well, yeah, it could, you know, but there's something about the way that she's filmed with the cheekbones. There's, you know, to me there was something masculine about her look at you know, from the very beginning. And I think there's something, you know, also with the way that the child is filmed. I mean, I think, you know, this idea of being in between or, you know, possibly mistaken for either is there from the very beginning. And then, of course, you know, kind of it reaches a particular fore where she's got a pass for a man as a pregnant woman, which is kind of almost like, you know, pushing it to a particular kind of extreme.
Yeah, because it's such a heavy denial of what's feminine about her that she's pregnant, and she has to tape that down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not sure, but I thought that was, you know, kind of very interesting, and it's interesting that her first thought, you know, when she sees her poster, is, I could pass for a man. You know, like, you know, all she's got to do is cut her hair, right?
Yeah.
So it's
and break her nose.
Yeah, it's not something that I'm projecting. I mean, the film is playing with that, I think, from the beginning. And also, I thought it was interesting that the father figure at the end is old, that he needs to inject steroids, you know, to maintain, you know, his masculinity. I mean, there's kind of almost like a cyborgian element to both of those bodies, right? You know, his maintained by a kind of, you know, a chemical, hers being transformed by intercourse with a machine. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's roundly a body horror of sorts, and the idea of bodies being changed, whether by will or not, is there throughout the film. Starts off with, you know, her cutting her hair, and obviously the transformations that she goes through are quite obvious and quite extreme. But as you say, the dad is also, it's a form of body modification, injecting steroids and working out. He wants to keep up with his job, and because he's getting on a bit and defying old age. That has elements of that too, right? He's not happy with the body in which he's encased. In fact, this is something else that Paulina said in her essay. The idea, in fact, she started off the essay with the idea of bodies are things in which we are encased, and they're the root of so much horror cinema. You know, it's absolutely something that this film is full of.
The other thing that I thought was interesting about Paulina's essay was, Kristeva's notion of, the abject. Yeah, kind of where she says, that which disturbs identity, systems, order, does not respect orders, borders, positions, rules. Yeah. And I thought that kind of, having a menstruating body that menstruates petrol with, petrol coming out of the woman's breasts, with, a pregnancy that's ripping her apart, and also where she scratches herself, and what she reveals is actually not some wound, but actually an emptiness. Yeah, when she scratches herself, you just see a hole, yeah.
Well, I think you get a metal shell underneath it, don't you?
It eventually comes out to be a metal shell, but initially all you see is nothing.
Yeah, that's true. Initially, there's a blackness, and I think some oil comes out as normal.
Yeah, so I think kind of, the film is like a fascinating kind of dramatization of all of those, feminist ideas relating to body horror, and it's kind of different presentations. To me, it kind of worked in bringing out almost all the worst taboos you can imagine, right? Like, so first, a serial killer, and kind of what that represents. Secondly, that the serial killer is a woman. That this female serial killer does not distinguish between genders. She's just as happy to kill women as men. This body gets pregnant by a machine, but then, that she allows herself to be protected by this real patriarchal figure. And actually the film underlines how patriarchal he says. Here he says, I'm God. Yeah, because he's the captain of this fire station. And then that it becomes incestuous. Yeah. That kind of, this father-son game turns incestuous, which horrifies him. Yeah. I thought that was all
it becomes incestuous after it has become absolutely clear that she is not his son. The towel has fallen at that point. He's seen her breast. It's absolutely he said, admittedly, no matter what, you are my son. I don't care who you are.
The film is so interesting about that because, it's revealed in stages, but it's denied in stages. So actually, the relationship becomes one of feeling rather than one of bodies. Yeah, but nonetheless, the father-son myth or game is maintained. So actually, when they begin to kiss, it does feel very incestuous.
Yes,
and he responds as if it is incestuous.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. It does feel that way. And I wondered how far the film was going to go with it. I also think it's interesting that actually the father, in hindsight, has worked out much earlier than I initially thought that she's an imposter. But actually, for me, when I was watching the film, that only became clear in the scene where her towel falls and it can't be denied. But actually thinking back on it, all those denials about, particularly with the one fireman who works for him, who has figured it out and wants to speak to the dad about it, wants to address it, says, never speak about my son and all this. Those denials, in hindsight, I think, do reveal a willful denial in him of something that he already knows. Especially when the mum comes in as well, and she immediately pegs it.
Yes, so which signifies, or which tells, or speaks, that actually he has a need for this son.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So, it's not, the question is not whether he is the real son or not, is, what necessitates his having a need for a son, yeah? What is this? Where does this need come from? And you get a little bit of a flashback where, that he leave his son die, in a fire, because you have this image, or, which is a projection of his thought of a child in a closet being burned, holding on to
a toy,
right? So does he feel responsible? I mean, the film has very interesting suggestions. Also, that his son, who he's lost, probably through his own negligence, the film at least suggests that, was a feminine son who liked to wear dresses.
Yes, there are those shots of the photo album.
That's right. So all of that I thought was kind of, really fascinating. I'm not...
In fact, you see that in him right from the start when you think about it. The first time you see him, the dad this is when he's in the police station and the officer says to him, we'll get a DNA test just to be sure. And he says, do you think I don't recognise my son?
Yes.
And then the blind is lifted or whatever. It's revealed that he sees Alexia. And what you see in him, I did think this at the time, what you see in him is not immediate recognition. It's not, it wouldn't be, I think this is how I rationalised it as well, it wouldn't be immediate recognition because it's clearly been 10 or 15 years since the loss of the child. I think you see on the posters, I think it's 7 to 17 is the age that, it's been aged up that far. So you wouldn't say, oh yes, immediately, necessarily. But that can also absolutely be read as an immediate acknowledgement, an immediate realisation, no, this is not my son, but I'm going to go with it.
The film has really interesting kind of doublings if you look at it. So, this is a father who loves his son, who is very feminine. You get the sense that Alexia's father, he's never shown to have love for her, right? There's always a kind of both, like a knowing firmness and disgust and impatience, and she's quite, or at least a little bit butchy, right? So the feminine son, the slightly butchy girl, the father who loves, the father who doesn't. They're kind of like interesting parallels, the father who helps at the end, and so one she kills, the other one helps her bring life. They're kind of, structurally in the film they're very interesting things that respond and play off each other, I think.
Yeah, in fact, the dad's actions towards Alexia could be read as the actions of someone trying to humanise a monster like Frankenstein.
Yeah, well, I think I read the father anyway as seeing a second chance at finding meaning in his own life. Because actually there's that moment where he thinks it's all lost, where he sets himself on fire. There
are a couple of moments like that. There's another one where he, it seems, tries to overdose on steroids.
Yes, deliberately.
When she flees.
Yes. So anyway, it's a very interesting film. I'd say I have to see it again to make sense of it. Except I found it really too painful to watch. Really. Yeah.
So the bits that you were wincing at and don't want to see a second time are the bits I would watch a second time because I thought they were wild and I love that sort of thing.
Yes, you love that sort of thing. I really don't. I mean, I don't like that kind of brutal, grotesque. I mean, I force myself to watch it, but it's certainly not a pleasure for me to watch. Though I do think that this is one of the most fascinating kind of directors working at the moment, and so I think kind of people should make an effort to see the film, partly because it also incites thought. It is a film that you come out thinking, well, what does it mean? And actually I think it's quite complex thought. It's very interesting thought, about gender and what it is to be a woman and what is life and what is love, really. So I think the film addresses all of those in very inventive in terrorizing ways. It's fascinating, and I suppose there's a lot of these brutalist directors like Gaspar Noé, who kind of make films that I find in many ways really disturbing, and that kind of nonetheless are fascinating for all kinds of ways, not the least conceptual. And I think this fits to me within that realm, but from a feminist perspective, which makes it even more interesting.
Well, absolutely. It's definitely a reminder of the new French extremity, which was the kind of French film. I don't know if it's considered to still be going on, but this would fit within it, I think, were it considered. But that was the film French movement of around the early 2000s, which Gaspar Noé fits into quite well. And certainly early on, in that opening sort of half an hour, the violence and and the use of colour so bold and the sexuality are big reminders of that. Although actually it reminded me so much of Gaspar Noé that, particularly in that long tracking shot which introduces you to the motor show, you go around the whole thing, I was thinking it's not as beautiful as it could be. There's something I wanted a little bit more. Well, particularly in that long tracking shot, which is quite ambitious. I felt like I wanted more precision in it.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? When she's dancing on the car, did you feel that it took time for framings to settle nicely, that sort of thing?
I thought that was quite deliberate, actually, and it's one of the things that I really like about the film, because throughout, certainly all of the beginning of the film, what you get is the film is sharply focused on faces, but with a shallow focus, so that all the backgrounds are out of focus. So you really feel that you're in these people's heads. Yeah. So so then it'll cut and you'll see a shot of the car showroom, right? But actually, when it's focused on the main characters, or it really is about like, the world around them is doesn't exist. What exists is just their being.
It's the connections and relationships between the characters that are fundamental, and that's where the film wants to keep you. But I did think that it wasn't as ambitious looking as it could have been, as I might have wanted it to be.
I don't know. I thought some of the images were quite extraordinary. So I would go beyond that. Actually, I think if a film is memorable for giving you a couple of images that you feel you've never seen before, it's one for the history books, and I think this one has several of that. I mean, the nipples kind of leaking petrol. I mean, I've never seen that before. And also that image of the shaved head, the pregnant body, the dirt, the petrol, the black stuff coming out of it. I mean, I just thought the film is full of amazing imagery, actually. Kind of imagery that I haven't quite deciphered yet.
I think there's imagery that is conceptually wonderful like that, but I think almost everything could have been shot more beautifully or more interestingly.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's very, very good. And actually, little things are fantastic, because I'm trying to think, why do I feel such a sense of threat? Like that scene that I was describing earlier with all the men, with their beefed up bodies dancing up and down. I mean, in a way, it feels almost like a gay porn film. Yeah, it was like a prelude to a gangbang or whatever, right? And actually, I remember scenes like that. When I used to go clubbing, you'd have like gay techno kind of discos that were like a bit like that. But it's so interesting how, the film almost desexualizes that. So all you get is the threat, not the sexual attraction to that threat. Yeah, I thought that was, very interesting. Likewise, the shot where she's performing in the car showroom, right? And you're right in between her legs. The camera's right in between her legs, right? And it feels both very sexual and not sexy, right? So, how she kind of creates this, really, what kind of the shot length, all of that went into making it sexual but not sexy, I think is fascinating.
The threat that you're describing, are you talking about the fire station dance scene? See, what threat did you feel? A threat to Alexia, or a more general feeling?
Well, a threat to Alexia that something terrible was going to happen.
Caused by the guy, done by the guys.
Yes.
The threat that I felt was that something would happen to her pregnancy due to being.
Oh no! I thought they would be
jumping around.
They were behaving like Neanderthals, right?
It became a bit of a mosh pit, and they're bumping into each other. And it's very testosterone fueled.
And you get the sense that there's no fun in that, really. Yeah, so something that could be this, it could have been depicted as joyous or sexy, or, but it becomes increasingly like, brutal, right?
The music part of that as well, very high tempo, kind of industrial sounding with no real tune to it. It's just boom, 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 boom.
That's right.
Was really good choice for that.
Yeah.
Amp that up. But actually, the interesting thing about that section of that scene, to me, was her attempt to integrate into it. You know, at the start you see her on the outside of this group, sort of jumping up and down and getting, kind of getting psyched up in a way. And then she gets into the crowd, but it doesn't quite work out. Eventually, they put her up on the fire engine, and that's when she becomes feminine once again.
Her response is to become the most feminine, in quotation marks, that we've seen her be in the film, which is, again, a very fascinating thing. So, I do think that, I think the film has great things.
It is interesting, but I'm not interested in watching it twice. And I'm not interested on the basis of this of watching Raw. I think that, the thrills that I felt early on were cheap, despite the fact I think they are setting up, kind of something to undermine or change later on.
Well, that would make them non-cheap.
They were cheap at the time. They felt cheap at the time, inexpensive, let's say. And despite the fact there is something very interesting about everything else that goes on, the development of the relationship with the father and everything that we've talked about, I also found it a little dull. I would have liked more visual interest.
I didn't find it dull at all. I think it's fascinating visually. I think it's a great film. It's true that it's a film I wouldn't see again, and the only reason is because I think I'm just too responsive, to all the brutal body horror elements of it. I mean, it's not, for me, I jump out of my seat, but I don't jump out of my seat with pleasure. So, that's the only reason why I wouldn't see it again. I think kind of conceptually, visually, politically, it's done through a female gaze, which I think is, very interesting. And it posits a figure that at least can be seen as trans at the center of it. I mean, what could be more fascinating than that, particularly at this period? Yeah, and it does so through the vein of a popular genre, which is, the body horror film, which is not my genre, which is the only thing that I have difficulty with. But I think this is, kind of an important movie.
Okay.
It won the award for Best Film at Cannes, and I think, I can understand why. And
was France's entry to the Academy Awards for International Feature and wasn't shortlisted, and there was outrage apparently, but I mean, having watched it, you do sort of think, what did you expect?
I mean, what are those 69-year-old people looking at that film? Yeah, what do you expect, right?
Yeah.
Which is probably a very ageist comment, but I think, not without cause. So anyway, what is your summary?
I mean, it is interesting. I just didn't like it as much as you.
All right. Well, on that note, a divided view here. So thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you.